I think it's what they bring to the table is at different aspects of that.
Yeah, cool. I just want to go live so we could see if anybody was going to pop in the live chat real quick. We'll give it a minute. No, but that's an interesting point, and I think that's definitely something that is worth bringing up discussion here in this video. So that'll be interesting. Oh man, I really need to get myself on a normal sleep schedule, or at least something resembling a normal sleep schedule.
Well, I'm wondering why aren't you sleeping? I don't understand. I thought you have everything by. Are you doing everything by internet or by online?
Yeah, all my school stuff is pretty much online, but some of it is like asynchronous, and as long as we turn it in by a certain time, we're pretty good. Um, and it's also like the night before last night. I've been gearing up for like my first novel-sized fiction, like completely novel-sized, and I don't know what it was, but it was like 1 a.m, and I just got like struck with so many ideas, and I started writing it all down, and come like 2, 3 in the morning, I was like, oh, but like I know how to fit some of these pieces together now that were, at one point just very disparate and out there. And yeah, before I knew it, it was 5 in the morning.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was just kind of piecing some stuff together. And I'm feeling pretty good about it, because I thought when I came up with the idea for this novel, at one point I was like, oh, I don't want to write it anytime soon because I don't think I'm good enough of a writer yet to make this as good as it could possibly be. But I don't know, after that one night of just kind of knocking a bunch of stuff out, I'm like, maybe I could write this. Like maybe I am ready to write this story. So that was kind of cool. I'm like, maybe I could. Yeah, it was kind of a cool journey.
Well, it's good. I mean, you never know. It's that there's that old expression wherever you draw inspiration. I forget the poet's name, but the poet said that the night has secrets to tell. Do not fall back to sleep. So whenever you wake up in the middle of the night has secrets to tell. Do not fall back to sleep. And so every now and then, when you find yourself waking up for no apparent reason at 3 or 4 in the morning, and you just find yourself in a contemplative mood, sometimes it's, I'll just sit there for half an hour and I'll just listen to the silence and just just be, just let things go. And it's I think, well, a lot of that's from all self-help. I remember, I think that's a quote from Wayne Dyer said that at one point. And he had a lot of wisdom, that guy, before he died. Still does.
It's true. I've done some of my best writing, like just either not being able to go to sleep or waking up in the middle of the night and having an idea. Like that seems to be where some of my best work comes from. So I definitely think there's a lot of validity to it for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think we'll be good to get the ball rolling. We'll intro us up. Hey guys, welcome to the 35th episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and another co-host of the comic book community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, or adaptations, we hit it all. This week, I am rejoined by my pal and the other half to our dynamic duo, my friend at ComicBoom. Brother, thank you for coming back on. It's good to see you.
It's good to be here, Dark Knight. I'm sorry to hear you're not getting enough sleep, but I'm happy to hear that if the reason you're not getting enough sleep is that you're drawing inspiration to come up with ideas for stories. I mean, what better justification to lose sleep than that?
I'm not mad. I would be slightly more okay with it if it weren't the grind time section of the semester, but overall, I'm not mad. So I appreciate it, man. So today, my pal ComicBoom and I are going to be coming at you with a discussion on the greatest supporting characters in all of comics. And I thought it was something really interesting because a lot of people, I think, are very prone to make videos on the internet or articles about their favorite characters in comics and their favorite protagonists and why this and why that. And I think comics, not only because of the longevity of the continuity, but also because of how broad it is, I think holds within it some of the greatest supporting characters of all time. And I know I had brought up to you how, or we had discussed how neither one of us really have a numerated list of an order of importance, but there is one character on here in particular that I think you could argue is the greatest supporting character in all of fiction.
Sure.
And there's another one within my pick of characters that I think could also, make an argument for one of the greatest supporting characters of all time outside of even comics. So I think this will be really interesting. And because of comics evolving in the longevity, it's given a lot of really talented creators time to dive into some of these supporting characters and make them all the more important, all the more compelling, and all the more interesting.
Mhm. I completely agree. And we were talking earlier before we went live about the different ways you can approach the idea of a supporting character. They've been called sidekicks. They can be called supporting characters. You can call them what you want, but you know they are the in many ways supporting characters. Let's be blunt. In many ways, a character is only as compelling essentially as their supporting characters. In many ways, it's been said, of course, that a hero is only as good as the villain.
Mhm.
But guess what? Heroes go through many villains, and the longevity of a character is defined in many ways by the supporting characters. And more specifically, heroes aren't so much defined by their villains, but they have everyday lives to live too. So it's the supporting characters that draw out who you really are. It's just like, if I want to know who you really are, you tell me who your the five people you hang out with the most are. You tell me who they are, and I'll show you who you are. It tells you something about yourself, who you hang out with, who you're with. And just like when you write a story, whether it's Batman or Captain America or Harley Quinn or Nightwing or Rick Jones or all these other characters, or David Banner when he's not the Hulk, or even when he is the Hulk, who do you hang out with? What are your friends? Because in many ways, they define who you are in many ways. And that's all part of the whole supporting character chemistry. And it's part of what creates the drama that makes the story.
No, you make a really good point, and I think it also serves as and building on that, I think also just looking at the interactions between the protagonists and those characters are huge because the supporting characters are probably the second most recurring, you know, characters in a book aside from obviously the protagonist. And so you get to see them interact with your protagonist, which in a sense will define who that character is down to their very core.
No, I completely agree. And I guess we can. Did you want to start off? You mentioned about the probably the most well known supporting character in the history of comic book, in the comic books anyway. And I'm assuming you're meaning Robin. By that I mean
So,
Dick Grayson.
so Robin is on my list, but Dick Grayson in particular wasn't actually like that number one pick that I think is the greatest supporting character in all of comics, and potentially even arguably all of fiction. But I think we can start by talking about Robin. Dick Grayson is obviously important, but I think that Dick Grayson, especially after moving on and becoming Nightwing, is kind of on the border of becoming really his own lead. In regards to a true supporting character, I think Tim Drake is arguably the greatest Robin in terms of being the best supporting character to Batman. I think he complements him well. I think that just by the nature that he is almost as smart as Bruce, but doesn't have the tragedy to feed his motives,
Mm.
allows him to take a little bit more of an objective look at things going on in comparison to Batman. And I think that aside from the fact that obviously he is motivated entirely out of a desire to do it rather than an obligation through tragedy, I think makes him really, really important. And again, that level of objectivity and care that he takes in his approach, I think, makes him arguably the best supporting character out of all of the Robins. What do you think?
Well, I don't mean to split hairs, but I feel compelled to split hairs here because, well, only because when you say supporting characters, and I realize we might get tied up in definitions here, but if I think, and I say this with respect to you, that if you like Tim Drake as much as you suggest you do, that he deserves more than to be called a supporting character. He's a character in his own right, and in that respect, I think he may have started off as maybe a sidekick or a supporting character, but I think the reason why you find him so compelling and why you like him so much as a character is because what he did is that he took that mentorship from Batman. He took that guidance, and he took the best of Batman and he added it to the best of who he was, and he became his own master. There's an expression that I love. It's the best master is not the person who has the most servants, but he's the one who creates the most masters. And so when I think of Batman as a master in his own way. He's a master of numerous things, from criminology to fighting skills to all kinds of things. But he also is riddled with flaws. And you can be a master of many things and be ridiculously flawed in many other things. Batman is a very flawed person. But he's a master. But he's had a lot of people that he has mentored who have come under him, and Tim Drake is one of them. And what Tim Drake has managed to do to great effect is he's managed to, not only did he have his own genius, but Tim Drake also needed guidance at one point, and he got it. But he still was his own person. He didn't allow himself to be indoctrinated by a master. He didn't become dark and brooding. He's not, this isn't like a single cell, morphing into two, like, he's not a clone of Batman. He's his own person. And that's the true definition of what Batman can be proud of, is that you pass on what you know, and every one of us, whether it's our children or our friends or the people that we mentor or help, we want them to be better than we were in some way, if we're brutally honest about it. I mean, I know we live in a very vain world. We live in a world where everybody wants to be number one and everybody's narcissistic in their own way. But at the end of the day, we want the next generation to be better than we were in some way. And we want to be able to say that maybe we played a part in that somehow, while you might be a little bit younger than me or older than me, that somehow, if my contribution to you makes you a better person, that's the best goal. That's what makes humanity better. And the supporting characters, what I love, and Tim Drake's a great example. I mean, I remember when Tim Drake supposedly died. Remember that storyline where we thought Tim Drake had died? Mm-hmm. I remember that really got to me because he was killed. And in many ways, the reason why Batman was so sad was that Tim Drake was different than the other Robins, right? He was different than, he had come at it differently. He didn't come from tragedy, Tim Drake. Tim Drake came from it. He was a person that wanted to live a normal life, and he still maintained his own perspective despite being influenced by the dark and brooding nature of fighting crime and the cowardly lot with Batman.
No, here's the thing, and I think you make a lot of good points that just kind of feed into how great Tim Drake is, but I still think that Tim Drake has never defined himself as his own character, at least not as his own protagonist, because he still operates to serve Batman as a supporting character. I think that just because a character is likable, it doesn't necessarily make them a strong protagonist with their own wants and needs, right? Like, if you look at the intention and obstacle of Tim Drake as a character, the intention of Tim Drake is to obviously he still feels to me that he exists as a means to Batman's ends. It doesn't feel like he's redefined his own motivations outside of what Batman wants. And that's why, like, you had brought up Dick Grayson at first, whereas I think Dick is still a quasi-supporting character for Batman. But I think to a degree, he also serves as his own protagonist that has gained his own traction with his own rogues gallery, with his own motivations to obviously do good. But to me, I don't mean this out of respect for Tim, because I obviously love the character, and again, I don't think how likable a character is would necessarily define them as their own protagonist. But Tim Drake to me always feels like he is operated for the sake of Batman's ends. You know, he might do it a little bit differently, but it still doesn't feel independent. And I think a protagonist needs a sense of independence. I mean, you look at Tim Drake's probably most notable series, I would say, is probably his Red Robin series by Chris Yost. And it was all about him finding Batman post Final Crisis. So I don't think he's really isolated himself and had that level of independence for me to be able to classify him as a protagonist. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way to the character, but I think in that regard, by him doing and being all of those incredible things that you'd mentioned before, and I'm not going to repeat them because I couldn't do him justice, but I think that in conjunction with what I'm saying here about him not being independent with his own wants and needs as much, makes him such an incredible supporting character.
Yeah, it's hard. I can't. Tim Drake is amazing, and there's no question. He's not my favorite Robin, but at the same, and the irony is the reality is I think most people probably can relate more, and even myself, quite frankly, could probably relate more to a Tim Drake than a Dick Grayson. Tim Drake is more the everyday guy. Albeit he's a genius. Most of us average folks are not genius levels like Tim Drake. I'll grant you that. But Tim Drake does seem to have more of that real world connection. And there's a little bit more of a grounding with Tim Drake that I could always relate to more, I will openly admit. And I actually do like, as much as I'm not a huge spoiler fan, I actually do like Tim Drake's relationship with Spoiler, because in many ways I think Tim Drake, because he was so grounded, I think that's one of the things that that Stephanie Brown was sort of attracted to, why she was attracted to Tim Drake perhaps more than to other members of the Batman families, because Tim Drake is more grounded, and I think that's what pulls in and attracts some readership to Tim Drake and why he's as popular as he is.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tim Drake is a great character, and I think that, again, putting him in the category, moreover, for me as a supporting character, doesn't demerit him at all, because he has led his own book and they have been great. But I still think that he is yet to truly come into his own. And I think just articulating it by, for example, maybe the Robin 80th anniversary book, he's still kind of trying to find his path, right? And I think that that is very true for the character currently in comics. And that might full well be a product of DC having no idea what they want to do with Tim Drake, which I think is very apparent by what's going on with him in Young Justice. But he unfortunately is still in that category, really, because he hasn't come into his own fully yet. And I think it'll be a while until he does. But yeah, I think Tim and the Robin mantle is obviously really important, because I think that Damian could also be considered one of the greatest supporting characters in comics, strictly because of the level of contrast that he provides to every story he's in with the Bat family. I think, really articulating his growth over time and where he was when he came in, and how he can kind of serve as a supporting character and adversity all in one, makes him truly unique. And just by virtue of the incredible talent who have penned him over the years, Grant Morrison, obviously Peter Tomasi, they're able to make that work. And I think that supporting characters also have to be compelling enough. And they need to provide something a little bit more than just being a supporting character to make it onto this list for me. And I certainly think that Damian could be one of those characters that would be considered one of the best supporting characters in comics.
I absolutely agree. And this, I guess we can break it down by going back to the foundation, and that is, why do we need them? Why do we need supporting characters to begin with? What does this supporting character bring to the table that's going to make this story better? Because if a character doesn't bring something to the table, if you're going to put a character alongside Batman or any protagonist, main protagonist character, unless they bring something to the table to create some story worth reading, it's a useless character. So what does Damian bring? Damian brings things on two fronts. Number one, he creates that parental dynamic, that respect for authority or disrespect for authority, depending on how you write his character. It's that tension between parent and child. And I think that I know for me, and I believe yourself too, Dark Knight, that was one of the things that Tomasi and Gleason did so well, and initially Grant Morrison did, is that Batman is not exactly parent of the year. And yet here's Batman thrown into this idea of he's got to be a dad to this kid that was raised by assassins before he even met him. And all of a sudden he's got this 10-year-old son who reveres him, but yet thinks he's better than him and wants to be the next Batman. I mean, the premise alone is fun to just think about. And then reading it, because it was so well written, first by Morrison, then by Gleason and Tomasi, it's the tension is there, and not only do you have that parent-child dynamic, but you also have that mentor-mentee dynamic. And I said before, and I know this from experience, it's hard to be a mentor to somebody when you're related to them, especially if they're your children. It's a different dynamic between father and child versus mentor-mentee. Very different dynamic. And in many ways, there's always that tension there. But that's what it brings to the table. And the best supporting characters, and Damian in the Batman thing is one of them, is that you have that there. And I just want to, I always seem to find a way to do a little bit of Bendis bashing and in all these live streams, but I just got to say this. I got to throw this in. This is one of those reasons why aging up John Kent was a huge mistake, because it deprived the readership of the supporting character of that relationship between Clark and his son John. And when that developing, that organic development of that relationship, from he's a young child as he grows, that's where the character lies. That's where the lessons lie. That's where the stories lie. And to strip that relationship, to age John Kent up and put him into the 31st century was, in my view, in the long term, structurally, in terms of storytelling, in terms of potential for storytelling, it's robbed us readership of seeing that develop in the context of a supporting character relationship along the same lines as Batman and Damian.
I couldn't agree with you more, to be 100% honest with you. I think you said it perfectly. And John Kent is actually on my list as one of the greatest supporting characters in comics. I think he's kind of like the rookie of the year, so to speak, supporting character. And I think you're 100% right. And there's always this constant argument with comics and how they kind of deal in perpetuity, and how people can sometimes feel that characters are stunted by remaining the same for such extended periods of time. But I think that, to be honest with you, doing like the skip forward, especially with a young character like John, who is still developing and is still so new to continuity, I think that has deprived the character more than keeping him young in perpetuity, like I'd mentioned before. And there are certainly arguments to be made for progression and moving forward, which I think we were still getting a lot of with John. But I think you're 100% right when you say that that time jump in that age gap, especially for him doing it alone in comparison to the rest of the DC universe, it A, is uninspired, but B, totally removes the opportunity to watch that organic growth and to watch that interaction. Because, and I've said this on numerous streams between you and I, but I think that Damian and John have one of the most interesting dynamics in all of comic books. And to watch them grow and learn together, and to hate each other and to love each other and to fight and to hug and to do everything under the sun that best friends and kind of surrogate brothers do, I think just provides not only a great experience for us to watch these characters grow, but a lot of potential for story. So I 100% agree with you. I think John Kent is an excellent supporting character, and it's unfortunate that we've been deprived of the experience of watching him grow up with Damian as a peer. And I'm hoping that a smarter, better writer than Bendis comes on sometime in the near future and de-ages him.
And I just couldn't agree more. And I just want to give a shout out to Helium and Tevia. I'm an honorary member of their Fortress of Attitude, and we've had 2 live streams where we're reviewing the Super Sons, and we just last week yesterday we reviewed Superman Rebirth issues 7 to 7 to 13, which was the trials of the Super Sons, and it was the first storyline where John Kent met Damian, and where both Superman and Batman were trying to teach John and Damian a lesson in trying to cooperate and work together as a team. And of course, it was chaos followed. Damian didn't want to work with John. John didn't work with Damian. And in any event, it was a wonderful story. Again, in Superman Rebirth issue 7 to 13, trials, and you can get it in trade paperback. I encourage people to get it. But it's the perfect example of, you got these supporting characters that are, in many ways, the Super Sons are characters in their own right, and they're learning from each other. Meanwhile, they got their parents, so you have that parent-son dynamic, father-son dynamic. You also have a mentor-mentee dynamic between Batman and Superman. Superman gives Batman advice, and Batman gives Superman advice all the time. And because a true covenant, a true relationship, a covenant of, I can learn from you, you can learn from me. We're both mentors to each other. Mm-hmm. And it depends upon our degree of honesty with each other. And we got to open up and share and be brutally honest with each other about if we're on a path and it's not going to get us to where we want to go, we might want to consider taking a different path. Superman and Batman have that type of openness in many ways. Batman sometimes can open up to Superman in ways that he can't open up to others. And particularly when Wonder Woman's around, Wonder Woman has a habit of getting the Trinity to open up a little bit more. And so it's important to remember, I think, that when we talk about supporting characters, at least in my mind, that it's not just about the young, the old, mentoring the young, but it's also about equals supporting each other. And whether it's in the context of the Trinity or the Justice League. And that's what I like about it. I don't want to expand the context of our topic of supporting characters, because I don't generally think we're talking about maybe colleagues, but I do think that the lessons for a good story about supporting characters, whether it's Batman or Robin or Flash or Impulse, that those same lessons can be used when telling group dynamic stories like the Justice League.
I think you make a really interesting point there, because I think that to some degree, most relationships where characters are bouncing off of each other, they could be categorized, at least for a temporary time, at least over the course of certain stories, as supporting characters to one another, which is interesting. And it really does kind of open up the boundaries of the conversation. But I think, we've spent a lot of time in Gotham, and I think it is a testament to how many great supporting characters are in kind of the Batman mythos, and there are certainly more that we could get into. But what would you say is your next kind of candidate for a great supporting character in comics that might be outside of Gotham for now?
Well, boy, you say outside of Gotham. I think the one that I thought maybe was a little bit of an outlier, the one that I think, I think most of the time she's outside of Gotham now, but I was going to say Harley Quinn. She was a supporting character to the Joker for the longest time. And people forget about that. And now I'm not sure. And again, you and I maybe should have talked more about this topic, because I wasn't really sure. Because again, I don't want to get tied up on definitions, but Harley Quinn, no question, she was a supporting character. Now she's arguably not a supporting character anymore, because she's surpassed the Joker's shadow, and I would argue she has surpassed the Joker as a character in pop culture in my mind. I do believe Harley Quinn is more popular than the Joker, although she isn't. She's certainly on par with him, and it's an example of how a supporting character doesn't need to support. You can, it doesn't have to be. It's about the what does this character tell me about the character it's supporting? So what does Joker's relationship with Harley tell me about the Joker? I always thought the Joker was this evil bastard that just loved to quote Alfred in the Batman movie there, in Batman Dark Knight Rises, some people just like to watch the world burn. Well, why does the Joker want Harley Quinn around? right? And similarly now with Punchline, right? Why does he need Punchline around? Is she like, does he miss Harley? Why does he want Punchline around? What does Punchline bring to the table? What does James Tynion the Fourth in bringing Punchline to the table as a supporting character for Joker? What does Punchline bring to the character about Joker? I would encourage readers, all of us, as we read that story, hopefully we'll get some stories in the next little bit with comic book, with this pandemic, but what does Punchline bring to the character? What did Harley Quinn tell us about the Joker? Because we know a lot about Harley Quinn since then, but what did Harley Quinn tell us about the Joker? That maybe, does the Joker have a heart? It's, in any event, it's interesting that sometimes the best characters that we have and the most popular characters we have start off as supporting characters, but why do they arguably become sometimes as popular or more popular than the characters they were initially supporting? What was it that they brought to the table that made them stand out? And Harley Quinn was one of those things where, for some reason, seeing a psychotic male killer wearing makeup, everybody loves to hate him, and he still remained a villain. For some reason, when we put psychotic white makeup on a female, we made her good. She started off as a villain, we made her an anti-hero, and now she's arguably a hero. What was it about that? What was it about Harley Quinn as a supporting character that writers felt compelled almost to write her into the role of an anti-hero? That's what I find very fascinating about that.
I think Harley is, as you said, a fascinating topic for this type of conversation, specifically because I think there is a thorough divide in where people think that her true role in the DC Comics universe is. And even kind of taking that a step further, being removed from her role, even the shift in her personality and her character type from transitioning as a supporting character to her own lead, there was a vast shift from kind of something a little bit more dark and something a little bit more psychological to something kind of lighthearted and darkly humorous. So I'm curious. I have two questions for you, and I know because you are thoroughly a Harley Quinn fan through and through from the beginning to now. One, do you think that, or do you? What role do you think she is better served, as a protagonist or as a supporting character, the Joker? And do you think that her character lends itself more to this kind of newer revitalization, as kind of jokey and a little bit kooky, versus the more psychological take, in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Well, I think the success of Harley Quinn, at least how I view it, her success is because initially, because she was associated with the Joker, and that's where her fascination lies. And it goes to the question that we posed earlier about, what does this character bring to the table? Why does Harley Quinn exist? Why is she so endearing? What did she bring to the table? What she brought to the table was a question in everyone's mind. And how can this woman be attracted to the Joker? He's a psychopath. He kills people. How can this woman? She must be crazy. So that's what we all assume. Well, she must be crazy. The Joker's crazy. We don't understand the Joker's psychosis. I personally am an outlier on this, but I think that the Joker's the easiest character to write, and I think he's the most abused character, because when every writer who writes the Joker has the Joker do whatever they want, and their explanation is, what's the Joker's motivation? It doesn't matter. He's the Joker. He's crazy. He just does it because he's the Joker, right? Harley Quinn was different. This is why Harley Quinn is more interesting than the Joker, I would submit. She's more interesting than the Joker because it's one thing to not understand the Joker. He's psychotic. He's unpredictable. But it's another thing to say, okay, why does Harley Quinn love the Joker? Because why would Harley Quinn consistently love the Joker, at least initially? Why is this woman going to do this? So isn't it interesting what happened here? Because initially, Harley Quinn, the answer was simple. Harley Quinn was a killer just like the Joker. She was. don't let the voice fool you. There's in the initial. I don't know. Sorry, I went out there. She let a young girl die in one of her stories. Harley Quinn was a badass. She was a murderer. She was a psychopath. Then all of a sudden, what she brought to the table, people didn't want that. The readership wanted her to be something different because she was so popular and everyone just loved her. And so suddenly she needed to break out, and they needed an explanation. God forbid there's a woman out there that's attracted to a psychopath. We can't have that. The Joker must have abused her in some way. He must have abused her, right? But isn't it interesting that in Suicide Squad, the movie, it seemed to me that Harley Quinn loved the Joker and the Joker loved Harley Quinn. But now all of a sudden we get Birds of Prey and Harley Quinn. No. Joker abused her. Joker tried to kill her. So they, in many ways, I'm a little, I find it fascinating because I think in many ways, the Harley Quinn is such a compelling character that I actually think that her character was not allowed to develop organically. In my view, it's the natural next step for Harley Quinn would have been continue to go a little bit more crazy before she. I think her character arc should have went more extreme before it came back.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that pop culture for and I look, I don't want to get political here, but I do think that she was such a popular character and she's selling a lot of children's books and everything else. I think there was this strong need by DC to sort of like pull the character back and come up with a justification for it. And because Joker was a psychopath, well, it's a fairly easy right to say, well, the Joker must have abused her. So let's slowly make her an anti-hero and then now make her a character, put Jimmy Palmiotti on her, Amanda Conner, make her a character, break the fourth wall, infuse a little Deadpool in her, and then go that route.
And do you think that was a logical? And I know you were saying you were hoping that the arc would have been a little bit more of a dynamic, curve before we got to her being at this point. But do you think that where she is now and the character that she's been developed to being at the current point in time, do you think that this is a logical stop in the progression of Harley Quinn? Do you think that eventually this is the point that she would have been at if we had gotten that more dynamic changing of the character?
Truthfully, no, I don't. I would have seen Harley Quinn as becoming more as the present Punchline character, in my view. Now, having said that, I'm not saying that the character arc for Harley Quinn as it currently stands is a bad one. I think it developed organically, and I think they did it relatively well overall. Okay, so I don't mind it. I'm just saying that I just find it interesting. That's all. It's very interesting because one of the things, and this is maybe a side point, that a very strong, compelling result of popular supporting characters is that they are made true characters in their own right by the powers that be if they become really popular. And we've seen that happen. We've seen it happen with Red Robin, Nightwing. Even Damian got his own series there. Supporting characters, they can become so compelling that even while they're learning, even while they are still supporting characters, they are interesting enough that they can support their own narrative and their own character arcs.
I think you make a really good point. Excuse me. And it's a weird predicament because in their own series, they tend to act as the protagonists, and yet I still feel like some of them haven't made the leap to be considered overall their own leading characters. It's really odd because Damian, although he's been on the lead of his own book and he's a co-lead in Super Sons, I still wouldn't classify Damian beyond being a supporting character in current comics. And again, this isn't like a stab at the character because I think I like Damian more than most people like Damian. He's my favorite Robin. Fight me on it. I don't care. But
no, I'm not. No fight for me.
Yeah. And so it's an interesting dynamic. And I think that those solo series, if handled by the right people, tend to do just as much, if not more, for the character in terms of definition than them in their traditional roles, you know, as a B or a C character in somebody else's book. So I think it's really interesting. And Harley Quinn, I thought, was a really interesting topic because I'm not a fan of modern Harley Quinn. It's just not my thing. I think it's hokey. I think it's kind of stupid. And I'm generally not like a big Deadpool in comics guy. So I didn't love that DC was kind of aping this Deadpool tone for Harley. But I am a fan of the old school relationship between her and Joker, and I think you make a very good point that maybe she could have become a hero at some point, but there definitely needed to be a little bit more of a dynamic arc rather than DC catering to the pop culture, who, let's be real, aren't the ones that are reading comics. So it's certainly interesting, and I think Harley was a very interesting character to bring up here because she is a she has a very different relationship with the category of supporting character than I think pretty much any other character in comics does. So I think that was an interesting one to bring up. And I think for me, moving out of Gotham, I think the Green Lantern mythos hosts some of the coolest, some of the most interesting supporting characters in comics. And I would be remiss not to bring up Kilowog. I think Kilowog is one of the most interesting, one of the most dynamic supporting characters in comics. And he exists as a great supporting character to pretty much any of the Earth Green Lanterns, you know, when they're kind of highlighted or given their own time in the sunlight. He is one of my favorite members of the Green Lantern Corps. He is, I think, kind of the spitting image of honor, you know, within that kind of militaristic police
he's
force.
the heart. I view him as the heart of the Green Lantern Corps in many ways.
Yeah, you make a very good point. He is the heart. He's the dignity, the honor, and I think that the one thing I can always respect about Kilowog is he is the, and whether or not he is always right or not, there is a conviction to his character to try to keep everything and everybody in check. You know, he's had a number of physical altercations with Hal, both when Hal became Parallax and in the New 52 when Hal kind of tried to frame himself as the bad guy to take some of the heat off of the Green Lantern Corps during the Renegade arc. And not to mention just as a character and his nature, I think really plays off of every other character in the Corps really well, whether or not he's taking more of a responsible role, more of a comedic role. I just think he's so versatile, and you can put him in a buddy cop book with any of the Green Lanterns, and I think you could put him in stories with characters not of the Green Lantern mythos, and it would still turn out to at least be compelling. What do you think?
I completely agree. One of the fascinating things about Green Lantern Corps, and I gotta, my perspective on Green Lanterns is this, that if you're chosen by the ring, in my view, this is how I view it. It's not just, I know that if you're chosen by the ring, you have the ability to overcome great fear. But I choose to believe that the ring also has an ability. It's a lot like Mjolnir with the hammer, with Thor's hammer. I think that the ring doesn't go out of its way to choose an idiot. Like a ring, the Green Lantern ring is not going to choose an idiot who happens to overcome great fear. No, the ring also chooses people who have a degree of some intelligence and wisdom. Whether it's Jessica Cruz or John Stewart or Hal Jordan or Kilowog or any or even Sinestro initially for that matter. And Sinestro, by the way, has a lot of wisdom in him. It's just a little bit more hardcore, but there's wisdom there in many ways. And what I find interesting is while they're supporting characters, they're all one-man armies. Like if you get a Green Lantern ring, you have an entire sector of the galaxy that you alone patrol. Think of the response. So the ring must think that you're pretty smart in your own right. Like you can't be a moron. Like you have to have more than just the ability to overcome fear. You got to have some intelligence. You got to have some life experience. You got to have something. And what I like about the Green Lantern Corps is they're there for each other. and they're mentoring and they're mentors to each other. What I like about Kilowog is he really does, he is the mentor. He's the straight shooter. He tells you about his failures and he tells you about his successes. And by the way, this is one of the sure signs of somebody who is a true mentor, somebody who you can learn from. Always beware of the person that's always telling you what they're doing right and how they're so much better than you and everybody else. You should be looking to the guy who's telling you what he's always done wrong. Because people who share their failures with you are the ones that you're going to learn the most from. Because you don't need, me telling you what will work, that's one thing. But quite frankly, if you're just starting out and you're in a field of which I'm in a field, then if I tell you the mistakes I made, you're probably going to learn more about what to, it's probably better that it's just as important to know what mistakes I made than the successes. Know the failures as well as the successes. A true mentor will tell you what will not work and what has not worked for him or her, versus sort of giving you the resume of successes. And that's the great thing about the supporting characters, particularly Kilowog, the ones that share with you what didn't work. What's your greatest failure? Tell you what, tell me what your greatest failure is, and I'll tell you what you're probably good at right now. And that's where therein lies the lesson. And that's some of the best Green Lantern stories. And some of the best comic book stories are where lie in failure. It's where the characters fail, where the supporting characters fail, because within the failure lies the lesson. And it's just like, it's like your old granddad said to you, it's not about making the mistake. You ask yourself one question: did you learn anything? You're going to fail. The question is, did you learn anything? And that's that basic lesson here in the comic books. That's what lies in some of the best supporting character stories, whether it's Batman or Robin or Green Lantern Corps or Flash and Impulse or Wally West or whichever you want to throw in there, where there was a Joker Harley Quinn story. And by the way, you can have a villain, and there's a lot of villains that have little mentors that want to grow up to be villains, right? The same thing. and it's, in any event, that sort of comfortable relationship with failure and being self-aware enough. If a character has that and shares that with other characters, therein lies some of the best supporting characters out there.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a really good thesis for strong supporting characters, and especially relating to the mentor role. And I think Kilowog very much serves a lot of those kind of descriptions to a big degree. And we also have Taylor Pector in the chat, who says that he also thinks that he would throw Soranik Natu in the ring about talking lanterns. I think
fantastic choice. Great choice. That's Sinestro's daughter.
Yeah. And I think especially because of her familiar relationship with Sinestro, but her inherent kind of morality and her intentions really pose her as a complex supporting character to the Green Lantern Corps. And I think that was a great pick. I didn't even think about her. Boom, any further comments on that?
Well, Soranik is again the daughter of Sinestro, and it's not even so much. And again, this is where we get tied up in the definition of what a supporting character is. She's not so much a supporting character of Sinestro, but Sinestro was very proud of his daughter, and naturally he would want his daughter to follow in his footsteps. But she became she's a Green Lantern, and she was a medical officer, and she even had a relationship with Kyle Rayner at one point. And her character arc is quite extraordinary when you think about it. She starts off as a Green Lantern. A lot of the Green Lanterns doubt her credibility because her father is, of course, Sinestro, the great traitor, the one who betrayed the Green Lantern Corps, formed the Sinestro Corps, which almost wiped out the Green Lantern Corps and the power battery at one point. And her relationship with her father, it's once again, we have that parent-child dynamic along with a mentor-mentee dynamic. But as I said before, it's hard to, when you're a parent, children don't always listen to your advice. Sometimes it's better if they hear it from somebody else, or that they have to discover it on their own. And the hardest part of being a parent is letting your child make those mistakes and discover it for themselves. And that's what you see a lot with Sinestro and his daughter Serenatu, is that she has to make those mistakes on her own, and he respected that, even though she was a member of a completely different corps. And the dynamic that brought to the Green Lantern Corps mythology, the dynamic that brought, I mean, it was perfect. It was beautiful. And it wasn't really, he supported his daughter. He would die for his daughter, even though she was part of a corps that was a different mindset than his, fear versus willpower. But nonetheless, that relationship of father-child bond, that supporting nature of that, you got to ask yourself, what's the nature of the support of the supporting character? Is it a partnership, or is it family, or is it it could be lovers, it could be something else. So the nature of the supporting character doesn't have to be in the nature of a sidekick or anything else. It's whatever the writer makes it. And with Serenatu, that dynamic of, and her character's taken a darker turn as of late. I think she even felt betrayed by Kyle Rayner. I think, is she still a Green Lantern? Did she become is she part of the Sinestro Corps now? I'm not really sure. But in any event,
she was the leader of the Sinestro Corps when we left off with her in the Hal Jordan the Green
Lantern. That's right.
Yeah. Which I think is interesting. I thought that, I remember, and I love that run. I love that run so much, and I think that Venditti is the only guy that could have kind of carried the ship after Jeff Johns with that Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book specifically. But I always remember feeling that her kind of sharp kind of turn to aggression towards the Green Lantern Corps always felt a little bit weird to me. I wish that we could have seen a little bit more of that and resolved that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when we left off with her, she was if I remember correctly, adverse to the Green Lantern Corps because of some sort of secret that Kyle had kept from her, and because of some conflict with John Stewart when John was the leader. I don't remember.
I thought that felt forced myself. I didn't agree with her character turn. I thought her character turn where she became darker, I thought that felt forced to me. I never really bought the whole Kyle Rayner secret and I'm turning thing. I never bought that. I never felt organic to me, to be honest.
I think I had always justified it because, if I remember correctly, they faced a villain that was the child of Kyle Rayner and Sornik Natu from the future or something like that. And I always thought that her sudden aggression was to split away from Kyle in order to not birth a child like that. And I think also because I think that he's pretty much the future son of her and Kyle Rayner. If I remember correctly, I think he also gives evidence that Kyle was like a really shitty father, like a really shitty absentee dad or something like that. And I think that she kind of made that darker turn in order to separate herself from Kyle and prevent them from ever giving birth to something like that. I think that, it was interesting. And I actually think that the dynamic where the Green Lantern Corps and the Sinestro Corps were working in tandem with one another was probably one of the most interesting things to come out of Green Lantern in the last, I'd say half a decade. But yeah, Sornik Natu, I think, was a very interesting bring up. JT Gamer is bringing up Gwen Stacy, and I think it's an interesting pick. I wouldn't consider her one of the greatest supporting characters of all time, strictly because I don't think that, I think that she serves more as a motivation for Peter rather than a full-on supporting character. Obviously, she hasn't been alive in continuity for, what has it been, 30 years now? Almost 40 years?
Well, she was
killed in the late 80s, right?
Well, she was. I think that was even in the late 70s, wasn't it? Her initial death, but wasn't she brought back? Like a clone of her or something? Wasn't she brought back?
I know that they did stuff. I know they did stuff with like clones and like Jackal, but I wouldn't consider that when. I don't
Yeah.
know. I wouldn't. I think Gwen Stacy is certainly an important character to the Spider-Man mythos, mostly in death. I think her death is more important than who she was in her life as a character because of how she motivates Peter and because of how it reinforces that kind of central mantra of great power and responsibility and so on and so forth. But I don't know if I would necessarily put her on the list, but that's a really interesting pick, I think.
Well, I think I'll defend that choice only because I think that she deserves to be on the list precisely because of the reason why I think you're dismissing her, and that is that uh, her profound effect on the life of Peter Parker. It's a huge impact on Peter Parker. Her death was as central to Spider-Man's ongoing motivations as the death of Ben Parker was. If you know, if at least in my view, and because it was his really first loss as Spider-Man, as because Ben Parker was the formative death that led to the origins of Spider-Man, but despite having his powers, even with all his powers in full throttle, Spider-Man still failed to save Gwen Stacy. So it was a supporting character that laid the foundation of the idea that even with great power, you can still fail. Even with great responsibility that you're meeting, you can still fail.
But
And I think it lies at the heart, and just to draw in pop culture again, it did lead. It's such a compelling character, just like Harley Quinn. Pop culture will not let Gwen Stacy die, and of course that's why we have Gwenpool and all these other Spider characters that utilize the Gwen Stacy template.
see, I just don't think that, and it's not taking away from her impact, but I truly don't think that in life, and in the example of her being a supporting character to Peter, I don't think it lands her as being one of the greatest just because her death kind of enacts a very strong symbol and a very strong representation for Peter. Because if that's the logic we're taking, then Thomas and Martha Wayne are also two of the best supporting characters in comics, even though we haven't had any real storytelling of them being alive and being supporting characters. So while I think, and again, I certainly couldn't take away from that because they are in comparison to Spider-Man, they are the representation and the symbolism that drives Batman in the same way that Uncle Ben's death drives Spider-Man. But I don't think that necessarily makes them great supporting characters. I think that their deaths were obviously just huge kind of stages to evoke symbolism and motivation. So while I think they're very, very important, I don't think I would concede that that necessarily makes them great supporting characters because we haven't experienced kind of a thoroughness of the character in life in the role of a supporting character. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah. I know. I respect that.
Yeah, no, but it was a great pick. I don't want to deter, and thank you for sharing, JT Gamer, because I think it brings up that really interesting conversation between what a supporting character represents in life versus in death. So I think that was a really kind of stimulating thing to bring up. But Comic Boom, what would you say is another pick for you as a great supporting character in comics?
Uh, this is one that's relatively recent, and it was controversial. At least it was a controversial scenario during Secret Empire. And again, I don't mean to get political, but I think it needs to be brought up because I think this is one of the strongest supporting characters that Marvel has, and that is the Falcon. Straight up, he was a sidekick to Captain America in the '70s. His character grew up in Harlem. He had good parents who died young. He began working for the mob, and eventually he became a sidekick to Captain America, Sam Wilson. And he initially, of course, in his origins, his plane crashed in Rio de Janeiro. He developed the ability to talk to birds. He became the Falcon. He teamed up with Captain America. He had that series with Captain America and the Falcon during the '70s, and that he became Sam Wilson, Captain America. He had a 25-issue series that was concurrent with Secret Empire and also concurrent with the series Steve Rogers, Captain America. and you saw the two juxtaposed alongside each other, those two series, and you could see that even while Captain America was actually Hydra Captain America, that you could still see the lessons and the difficulties that Sam Wilson had being an African American in America, taking on that mantle, but yet still trying to uphold the principles and the values of the Constitution, of what it meant to be American. I think, without drawing up all that comic culture war nonsense, I think it was very well done, and I think Sam Wilson is an exceptional, was a great sidekick. He learned all the right lessons from Steve Rogers, and he brought that to the table. And just a quick note on Avengers Endgame. I know a lot of people at the end of Avengers Endgame were upset with an older Steve Rogers handing the shield to Sam Wilson as opposed to Bucky Barnes. But I think he made the right choice. I think that an older Captain America, had he lived through the 1940s and the decades leading up to the age of 120, as he did in Avengers Endgame, I think he would have chosen Sam Wilson to give the shield to, for the simple reason that, frankly, to be blunt, politics does have some things to do with it. I think that America's about diversity, and I think Sam Wilson is a better choice for the shield than Bucky Barnes. That's how I feel. And I think he in many ways became the more relevant and appropriate sidekick and supporting character to Captain America, and then finally assumed the mantle of the shield himself when he took back the shield in Secret Empire. And I love Bucky Barnes, don't get me wrong, but Bucky Barnes was the right guy during World War II. But for the present day, I think Sam Wilson is a fantastic supporting character.
I think that is an excellent pick, and I think that your justification for it is spot on. It was so funny because before we sat down and had the stream, I was really juggling with putting Bucky on my list, and I didn't end up putting Bucky on my list. And I didn't even consider Sam Wilson. And your explanation there really makes me wish that I did, because I think you really evoke all of the right kind of sentiments there. And I wasn't a huge fan of Secret Empire, but I think that you make an excellent point in the way they handle Sam Wilson and his dynamic with that atmosphere of Secret Empire. Because as much as I'm critical of the things that don't necessarily go right in comics, I will also not deprive something that I might not like as a whole from all of the good strokes that it has. And I think that was an excellent one. And that dynamic for Sam, and obviously the classification of diversity, I think is really interesting. And while I enjoy personally Bucky's time as Cap more than I enjoy Sam Wilson, I think that it's because Bucky isn't fit for the role, and because he does it out of an obligation to his mentor that kind of evokes a very particular struggle in being Captain America that Sam Wilson doesn't have. And so that's really what makes Bucky as Cap more compelling for me to read. But in terms of the symbolism, in terms of kind of the rightful heir to Captain America, I think Sam Wilson is it. I think Sam Wilson ultimately represents more than Bucky. I think that you bring up an excellent point, obviously, about just the civil and social circumstances of the United States and how difficult that would be for a Black Captain America. I mean, honestly, I can't comment on it any better than you just did. But
I will say this to you, just to add that Bucky has better. I think of Ed Brubaker's amazing run with Bucky Barnes as Captain America. That has never been surpassed. No one's written Captain America better, I think, than Ed Brubaker. So
I agree.
I will 100% concede that Bucky Barnes has better Captain America stories than Sam Wilson did under Nick Spencer. And I'm not taking anything away from Nick Spencer because I enjoyed his run on Sam Wilson Captain America. But I just feel, as I said, I won't repeat myself, but I just feel that there's that old Batman cliche from the Batman movie there about being the hero, that Batman was the hero, not the hero that Gotham wants, but the hero that Gotham needs. I think Sam Wilson Captain America might not be the Captain America that most of America wants, but I think it's the hero that America needs. And I felt that during Secret Empire too, in terms of what he brought to the table and sort of challenging us and making us look within and maybe saying, look, this is about, if this is really about heroism, about what's inside and what you stand for, and despite the adversity, Sam Wilson, I think, represented that bet more so even than Steve Rogers.
No, yeah, I think you bring up a really, really great point, and I'm so glad that you brought him up because it really stimulates a lot of thought for me. Especially because he's a character that I didn't think to put on this list, and yeah, like I said, I couldn't have said it any better than you did, my friend. So I'm glad you did, and Sam Wilson is definitely a great pick. For me, my next pick, staying in Marvel. I gotta, especially after Jason Aaron's Thor, I gotta say Freya, Thor's kind of mother stepmom, so to speak, his
Really?
adopted mom of sorts. I think that she is such a strong supporting character, and namely in what Jason Aaron did with her, because she is so unrelentingly in support of Thor's positive ventures, and not only in being a nurturing mother figure, but also in her ability to call him on his bullshit. And I think that that in and of itself really says something about her want and her desire to help build Thor into the best character, into the best man, into the best potential future king of Asgard he can possibly be. Because in doing so, in depriving herself of being that kind of constant um in depriving herself of being that constant kind of whisper in the ear telling him that he's always doing a good job, and being somewhat critical of him, I think really speaks volumes about, again, her intentions as a supporting character.
I would never, it's funny. It never even crossed my mind. I never thought of Freya, but you make a very good point. I love Jason Aaron's 3-arc Thor run. Especially his second arc with Jane Foster Thor run. The first arc was Gore the God Butcher. Second arc was more Jane Foster, and then the third arc was the War of the Realms. The second arc being my favorite. Freya, during all of it, was you're absolutely right. She's a very strong supporter of Thor. She had an interesting relationship even with Jane Foster, and again, it goes back to that idea of what kind of support are we talking about here, and it's family. And the great thing about family as a story device, when you have a supporting character that's a father or mother, is that it automatically has more drama.
Yeah.
And it just does.
And
Because
there's also something to be said too about kind of the surrogacy of her maternal relationship with Thor, because she's not Thor's birth mom. I think in Marvel mythology, Gaia is Thor's birth mom, which maybe she might have a name in Marvel mythology.
I don't know. I always thought it was Freya. So
no, Freya
you
is
taught me something. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Freya is. I think Gaia remains permanently on Earth or something along those lines, and obviously Odin, being the the rascal that he is, gets remarried, and it's with Freya. But yeah, I think speaking about what she's done as a supporting character for Thor and for the entirety of the Asgardian mythos, as a surrogate mother, is almost even more important. You know what I mean? Because she does it out of choice. She's not really obligated by blood. And I think that is also kind of one of the factors that serves to make some of these characters that directly support other characters in a more intimate way. I think that is a real testament to how great they are.
Yeah, and one of the things that Thor really has always badly needed as a character, quite frankly, and I think still does, and I think Jason Aaron brought that with Freya, although he could have emphasized it even more, if I'm honest. And it's one of the things that it's one of the reasons why I prefer Jane Foster as Thor, and why I like Jane Foster's arc more, is there's and there's just a little bit too much testosterone with Thor. He needs a little bit more of a female. He's always he's always the mega alpha male. And look, I read comic books. Of course, I love alpha males. They're awesome. Kick some ass. But he needs he needs that sober second thought and that female perspective and that maternal advice from his mother. I mean, that's that's what he needs, because I've always seen Thor as more of his father than his mother. And we always see more of his father's character traits playing out in Thor than his mother's. And now I should state be clear here. I'm not an expert on Thor. I only started reading really Thor. I read Straczynski's run and I read from Jason Aaron's run. So maybe there's another story arc where he displays more of his motherly sins. I don't know. So that's where I come from. I'm just if there's more Thor stories out there where there's more on display his mother's influence, then I haven't read them, and that's on me. But and people can tell me where to read. I'll happily take some advice what story arcs to read. But I actually think I would love to see more of that, and because I think Thor is one character, and even frankly with Donny Cates' run, Donny Cates is not really focusing. Donny Cates is really playing Thor as like a kick-ass character and everything else, and I'm loving that. But we're not really seeing a lot of the supporting characters for Thor. If the strength of Thor is with the supporting characters, probably lately, I don't know if he's really getting all that.
Well, and I think that speaking specifically with Freya, you've read it. Jason Aaron's Thor run, I think, specifically puts emphasis on this in the transition from Jane Foster Thor into Thor reclaiming that title for himself again. And you look at a lot of the struggle, and I don't mean to spoil a run that's like, a couple of years old, but looking at that transition when Thor decides to reclaim that title and decides to kind of strive for his worthiness again, I think is ultimately a highlight of how Freya has impacted him in that nurturing, in his unrelenting desire to be a nurturer for Earth, in his unrelenting desire to be that figure to protect Earth and the people of Midgard, in the same way that Freya was his surrogate mother, and arguably more impactful than his own mother to him in his character traits. Thor does the same for Earth in a way that Odin never did. Odin actually tried to dissuade a young Thor from being so active on Midgard. So I think that that's important in and of itself. And especially reading those later issues of Jason Aaron's Thor run, I think really highlight that for me. So if you want something, I would say reread that and like look for it, because for me, I definitely felt that her impact was ever present, and especially in her in her kind of mentality to fight against oppression, to fight against the evils of the earth, even if it's something that she loves. I mean, you have that really kick-ass fight between her and Odin at some point where there's like a physical conflict there, and yet I think it's highly representative of Thor as well, and his nature to unrelentingly fight for what he thinks is the right thing. So I think there are definitely elements of Freya that have kind of matriculated down to Thor.
Yeah.
Taylor Pecker again brings up another great pick in the chat, with Renee Montoya being one of his favorite supporting characters. That is an awesome pick. I didn't consider putting her on my list, but I'm not going to argue with that pick. I mean, you go from the 52 into, her interactions in Gotham Central, so on and so forth. I think that she is a very strong, highly underrated, supporting character in the DC universe.
And now she's the supporting character with Lois in the Lois Lane series, written by Greg Rucka, which is on, before the pandemic, it was on issue 9, I think it was, or maybe going into issue 10. She's a character that has an extraordinary arc. I mean, she, of course, starting off in Gotham Central, she was a character that sort of, she was one of the first characters that really sort of broke. She came out as a lesbian in that famous story arc, Half a Life, where she revealed her sexuality to her parents. She had a precarious relationship with her father as a result. She would go on to become the Question, and she, she's the street level hero the street level hero that she's our connection, because she's not a superhero per se. She doesn't really hang out with that crowd. She's somebody that we could bump into in a bar. She could drink us under the table, and that she could turn around and fight alongside the big boys. She's and yet it's interesting that we call her supporting character, because in many ways, Gotham Central, she was the main protagonist in many of those storylines. And she in fact, you could legitimately say that even Jim Corrigan was a supporting character to her in Gotham Central in some of those story arcs. And yet I suppose we could mention Gotham Central as being an actual comic book that dealt with numerous supporting characters. All of them, that entire series was about supporting characters in and of themselves, which I think is a testament to the quality of those characters, because they became sort of leading characters in their own right.
No, 100%. And it's in the same vein that we've talked about books where, for example, specific Robins have gotten their own titles where they're the leads. I mean, Gotham Central was a character that was led by supporting characters. And I think looking at comics and the realm of comics as a whole, I would say Renee, she serves more as a supporting character than a protagonist, although she has been a protagonist in a number of series. And Gotham Central, is a fantastic, if you guys haven't read it, if you're a Batman fan, if you're a crime noir fan, if you want to delve deeper onto the streets of Gotham, highly, highly recommend. Greg Rucka, Ed Brubaker, I believe Michael Lark did a majority of the art. Fantastic series. But yeah, it really goes to show that supporting characters can serve as protagonists and do it very, very strongly. But overall, I would say Renee serves a little bit more to the mythos of Gotham and to the DC universe as a supporting character, but it doesn't take away from her. And I'm glad Taylor brought her up, because she is excellent. She is compelling. I think that she has a very specific drive to her character that is unlike a majority of other characters in the DC universe. So yeah, I'm glad we could talk a little bit about Renee Montoya. Boom. What is your next pick for a great supporting character in comics?
Well, I'm gonna throw a little wrench into this. I wanted to give an example of a supporting character that works, but for all the wrong reasons. And I'll explain myself. And I was going to say Deathstroke and Rose Wilson, Slade Wilson and Rose Wilson. And because I think it's an example of a supporting character, Rose Wilson initially, of course, being the supporting character to her father, Deathstroke, that Deathstroke is a terrible mentor. He's a terrible father. And Deathstroke is she's a supporting character. That relationship, it shows why some relationships work and don't work. And it's not enough, if you're a parent, to love your child, but yet never mentor them, never help them. That's what Deathstroke is. Deathstroke will fight and die for his children, but he never gives them any insight. He's always dark and brooding. He always is a smartass. He's always killing. He doesn't help out, but he'll show up when their lives are in danger. He's fairly useless. And I got to say, sometimes even Batman displays those characteristics in his own Bat family. But I find that interesting, that the supporting character dynamic, it can, and I don't even mean this as an insult. Sometimes a dysfunctional supporting character dynamic can make for really interesting stories. And the most compelling one I can think of is the Deathstroke and Terra in the famous
Judas Contract?
The Judas Contract, Teen Titans. That supporting character of Terra, and she was, she basically Deathstroke. She worked for Deathstroke. The dysfunction of that relationship, but yet she very much portrayed the Titans. She was a supporting character to different characters there. You could say she was a supporting character to Nightwing, that maybe was her moral thought, and then Deathstroke was her other immoral thought. And that tension there, and ultimately she ended up dying, betraying the team and dying. Spoiler alert. I think that looking at the supporting characters, and that in context of stories where that relationship failed abysmally, I think can also give us some insights. and make for some compelling storytelling. So to answer your question, do I think that Deathstroke and Rose Wilson are the great, great supporting characters? My answer is, I'll say no, but they're great they're great insofar as they create compelling stories. And if we're looking for good stories, remember what I said before, we can learn as much about failure and relationships that don't work as we do from relationships that do. And so in that respect, I think that we have a successful supporting character relationship when we talk about Rose Wilson and Deathstroke, or Tara and Deathstroke.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I think that the angle that you're taking specifically is really important to kind of discuss here, because although the video and this conversation is titled, the greatest supporting characters in comics, I don't think it necessarily implies who is the best at supporting the character that they are meant to support. I think who are just kind of objectively great characters that serve the role as a supporting character, as a function, are important to bring up too. And I think that is an interesting take that I didn't consider when kind of coming up with my list for this discussion. I think that angle also stimulates a lot of conversation. You're doing a bang up job at that today, by the way. I give you a lot of credit, Mike. Yeah, I think that discussing kind of the moral foundation for Tara versus kind of the pure motive to pleasure and to please Deathstroke, and I guess she does that in more ways than one in the Judas Contract, but
Yeah,
I think that it is an interesting conversation to pose. And Rose Wilson Ravager, she's really kind of jumped around in the DC universe, from obviously aiding her father to being a member of the Teen Titans, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think. We get another really interesting one brought up in the chat here by Gore Vidal. He says Karen Page was an important character, was important part in the character development of Matt Murdock, from Miller's run through and Ascenti's, culminating with Kevin Smith's, a tragic character in the end. Yeah, Karen Page. I have Karen Page and Foggy Nelson kind of as one entry on my list here. And I think, yeah, I think Gore Vidal here brings up a really, really good point, because I think that Karen, in ways, mirrors elements of Matt Murdock. And especially in Born Again, when she really gets thrown through the ringer and she's trying to find her way back to New York, back to kind of elements of her humanity after selling her soul essentially for, her drug addiction, I think is a really important mirror for Matt Murdock and Matt Murdock's growth in Born Again after losing everything in his life by being Daredevil, and kind of refinding the foundation and the motivation to be a masked hero. And in that same vein, yeah, I think Karen was an interesting and an excellent pick because of how her role as a supporting character is translated throughout numerous writers. You go from Miller to Nocenti to Kevin Smith, and again, her death, in the same way that Gwen Stacy serves a role for Spider-Man, serves a role for Matt Murdock moving forward.
And it's, Karen Page's betrayal of Matt Murdock that ultimately led her to make the choices she did. And of course, her untimely passing at the hands of Bullseye, that, it was a test of Matthew Murdock, because despite the betrayal, he didn't abandon who he was. He never betrayed her. He still stuck to his guns. It was a test of his character. And it's we've seen this before in the best stories, and even in our own lives, the test of your character in terms of your support for those you love, despite the fact that they hurt you and they do you wrong. What's your capacity to forgive? The capacity for redemption and forgiveness and atonement, which are themes that run rampant through the best Daredevil stories. Daredevil, Matthew Murdock is routinely, often he's in the confessional talking to a priest, and his Roman Catholicism is quite something that has defined his character, and that interplay between forgiveness and redemption, and the role it plays and how it defines you as a character and how you find the strength to move forward is very, very important, because forgiving someone is a very difficult thing to do when you've been wronged to the extent that Matthew Murdoch was, and the lessons that we can all take from that. I mean, look, it's sort of like, it's easy to help an old lady across the street. Okay, are you more likely to help the lady across the street if she just called you a bastard? Even though she needs the help. I mean, that's I'm oversimplifying it, but that's really the truth of it. Help somebody who has wronged you. Protect them with your life, as Matthew Murdoch does. This is the stuff of it's really the ultimate in heroism, what Matthew Murdoch does, and he's willing to be a martyr based on principle that goes, and he's willing to die for it, and that's what that supporting character of Karen Page brought. That's why that story of Born Again is so powerful. Karen Page is just as powerful in her portrayal as Matthew Murdoch was in his heroism that overcame it.
Well, that, and I think, just kind of dovetailing back into the conversation of his forgiveness, it was especially trialsome because it was a product of like the trials that he has to endure, and they in Born Again, which are arguably the most difficult time, which is arguably the most difficult time in Matthew Murdoch's life, is a product of Karen Page's weakness and her betrayal. And I think that his ability to forgive her was one of the kind of fundamental steps that he had to take. And his willingness to do it so quickly and easily was one of the fundamental steps that Matt Murdoch had to take in order to regain himself in Born Again and to reestablish himself as Daredevil and that motivation. So yeah, Karen was an absolutely awesome pick for Daredevil, because I think that she's defined him through many prolific arcs, and then again further in her death obviously serves as that kind of symbol that we had mentioned earlier in the conversation. So Gore Vidal, awesome pick. Really glad you brought her up.
Yeah, and I feel I'm a Jonah Hex fan. I gotta interject. Taylor Pector brought up Tallulah Black for Jonah Hex. I don't know if you're familiar with Tallulah Black, Dark Knight, but I'll just have a quick mention. Tallulah Black was a woman in the West who was she was raped and brutalized by her husband and by a bunch of evil bad guys. She was knifed, she was scarred, and she was a beautiful woman that was badly scarred, and she was wronged, and she found vengeance through Jonah Hex's help. She found vengeance on the people that wronged her, and Jonah Hex helped her do that. In many ways, you could, if you think of the Old West as being slightly more brutal than modern day, Tallulah Black is like a female Robin to Jonah Hex. Of course, there was a love interest there as well, but she as a supporting character. What's fantastic about Tallulah Black, Cole's Notes version, is that Jonah Hex and Tallulah Black both have origins in extreme violence and extreme darkness, and they overcame it through vengeance on their enemies, but through each other they found love, and that's where they found their redemption. And in the final issue of Jonah Hex, they sailed off in the sunset together, leaving the violence behind, and Jimmy Palmiotti and Darwin Cook gave them a happy ending. So that's a great little that's a great supporting character story as well.
That's cool. I mean, I don't have a lot of background knowledge on Jonah Hex, but just hearing you discuss it, I think gives a very solid foundation for what is a great supporting character. So yeah, that was a really interesting one to bring up. Boom, who went last? Was it you or me?
Well, I cheated here, so you can go again.
Oh no, go ahead. Bring up your next big pick.
Well, I did go last. I think I brought up Rose and Deathstroke, and then I said Tallulah Black.
Okay. Well,
Go ahead.
Sure. I guess I'll bring up the one that I teased at the beginning of this conversation as the greatest supporting character in all of comics. And I think you could make an argument that this character is one of the greatest supporting characters in all of fiction. And it's Alfred Pennyworth. I think Alfred
Okay.
is next to Batman my favorite member of the Bat family, strictly because of the role he serves as a surrogate father to Bruce, as a surrogate grandfather to the rest of the Bat family, and his unrelenting love and desire to see those characters prosper, and his motivation and conviction to see to that by any means necessary, whether or not it means a detriment being thrown into his life, whether that or not that means a potential loss of his own life. I mean, Alfred is incredible. Um, and I think that his resolve to do what he feels needs to be done in order to preserve whatever he feels he needs to preserve regarding the characters of the Bat family, and obviously, namely his relationship with Bruce, is astounding. Um, and I really can't say enough about Alfred. So before I go on bumbling, Comic Boom, what do you think of my assessment of Alfred as the greatest supporting character in comics?
Well, first, I'm embarrassed to admit that can you believe I never even thought of Alfred, never even crossed my mind, and now I feel like a complete moron. You brought it up, it's because it's such an obvious one. I was so obvious it was staring me in the face, but I was just thinking about other things. I admittedly I was thinking about more spandex related characters, but no, Alfred is Alfred is the reader to Batman. Batman is a dark and brooding, and Batman is a deeply disturbed character on multiple levels. No matter even interpreted in the kindest light, Batman is somebody who's desperately searching for something, whether it's defeating crime completely or searching for his own happiness. Batman is a character that is missing something, and what Alfred is reflects, in my view, the readership, in that we're all hoping that Batman finds the happiness, and Alfred is always trying his best to get Batman to try to find that too. Alfred's always trying to get Batman to go on that date, to have that extra hamburger, to have another cucumber sandwich, to relax, take a break, forgive yourself. I mean, don't lose touch with your humanity. And that's what Alfred is a reflection of. Alfred brings that to Batman, and by doing so, we speak through Alfred, because we want Batman to find that happiness too, that Alfred wants for him, because Alfred always just thinks of him as a son. And I'm going to give some props to Tom King here, because as much as I was not a big fan of Tom King's run, I do think that Tom King wrote some. One of the things that Tom King I thought did well was that he wrote some pretty interesting perspectives on Alfred. Yes, he killed off Alfred, and I didn't like that, but there was some pretty good Alfred perspectives that Tom King brought to the table, and notwithstanding the fact that he killed him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, to me, Alfred is more Bruce Wayne's father than Thomas Wayne was. Alfred is the foundation for Bruce Wayne's morality. And I think if you look at the way Bruce Wayne, to some degree, was ready to give up his own humanity to become Batman, and the lessons, and he was readily willing to give up some of the lessons.
I'm sorry, my daughter's in the background.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with I'm not upset by a little feature of the baby boom.
Yeah.
But it Alfred, it fundamentally, I think, even more than Bruce Wayne is conscious of, represents so much more of Bruce's humanity than anybody else. And I started bringing up, I think if you look at Bruce's willingness to give up the lessons that Thomas and Martha Wayne had taught him in order to become Batman and in order to avenge him, it was Alfred that reeled him back to the ground, that grounded him. And I think ultimately serves as the structure to Batman's crusade and his war on crime. And just not to mention, all of the ways that Alfred pursues support of Bruce and of the family, but namely Bruce, in how he ultimately realizes that Batman, as a mission for Bruce, provides him with a purpose that nothing else possibly could. And although he is deeply um, fearful of the potential end result of Batman on Bruce Wayne's life. I love that he sees how uncompromising Bruce is, as much as he doesn't like it, and is willing to be the man in the chair and to say, you know, if you're gonna do this, I may not like it, but I am going to be the one to make sure you come out of this alive. And there's such a level of drama that Alfred adds to that character dynamic in the way that he watches his son getting bloodied and beaten, and knowing that that is a product of his son's purpose, and him being willing to help him in that pursuit. Um, to me, you know, I always kind of have this thing in my head where I think it's a shame that writers tend to not let Batman acknowledge how important Alfred is, and to kind of let him disregard Alfred. Because to me, I think the logical next step in Batman's growth isn't forsaking the role of Thomas and Martha Wayne, but I think it's acknowledging just how special Alfred is and how special his impact is on Batman, and on the rest of the family. You know, when Batman was perceived dead after Final Crisis, Alfred's resolve to obviously Alfred was suffering, but in his resolve to make sure that legacy and that perfect purpose and that drive lives on was just so unrelenting and beautiful. And I could go on about Alfred for that. I could make an entire hour-long conversation on why Alfred is such a special character, because not only does he serve as the backbone to Batman's war on crime, but also in his role to the rest of the Bat family. You know, and you look at Damian. Uh, to me, Alfred was the first one to crack Damian's kind of hard exterior, and I think that really goes to show something in how special he is as a character. Um,
I agree. I will say that if there's one character dynamic, character relationship that could be explored even further, it's Alfred and Batman. I always ask myself, you know, what is it that Alfred knows about Bruce Wayne that nobody else does? Because guess what? Very few stories. In my mind, there's not a lot of stories about Batman's formative years, about when Bruce Wayne traveled the world. We do get some occasionally, but for the most part, a lot of it is still shrouded in mystery. I mean, we did get. I remember there's been a number of storylines. I don't want to try to sit here and waste time remembering them all. I am aware of a lot of stories where Batman, yes, was training as a young Bruce Wayne, but I think I would love a series that really explores that. But guess who was with Bruce Wayne while he was doing that? I think Alfred was with him more than the stories would suggest. I really do, because I think it was Lucius Fox that ran Wayne Enterprises. It wasn't Alfred. Where was Alfred? What was Alfred doing while Bruce Wayne was in his formative years, learning the skills that he would take to be Batman? And Alfred was the guardian, and people forget the significance of this. Alfred was the guardian of Bruce Wayne. He's not going to let some young teenager fly all over the world to do whatever he wants. Alfred's more responsible than that. I think Alfred was with him, and I think why Alfred views him like his son, because Bruce Wayne is Alfred's son for all intents and purposes. It's his guardian. It's a father-son relationship. It's just different, but there's no question it's a father-son like relationship. And Alfred experienced a lot of those things, I think, that Bruce Wayne did. And I think a lot of those stories have yet to be told. And what we have gotten, we're always getting the stories, which are still good, with Alfred at the end of his life, looking back on Batman, and, you know, loving him, and, you know, wanting what's best for him. But I think that there's so much more potential in stories to be told about Alfred being a mentor to Batman. I think Alfred has much more of a profound effect on the behavior of Batman than we are led to believe, because so many of the stories that we've gotten is about, you know, Batman going to the edge and not coming back, or what prevents Batman from going totally dark. Well, it is because of influences from Alfred. And I think we need more stories to show what that influence was, because I don't think we have enough of them.
No, I mean, like I said before, and I think that you're kind of speaking to that. I mean, first of all, I don't think it is a father-like relationship. To me, Alfred is Bruce Wayne's father more than Thomas Wayne could have been, and is, and he is fundamentally the groundwork for Bruce Wayne's morality. And I think that you bring up an excellent point in that I think it would be really interesting to see some stories, or at least more stories of the development of Bruce's and Alfred's relationship, and really see why Alfred feels that he has an obligation to serve that paternal role to Bruce. But I mean, really, Alfred represents so much to the crusade of Batman, and without Alfred, I think that without Alfred, Bruce Wayne would have become a murderer a long time ago. I think Alfred really is the humanity of Bruce, and it shows really well, in stories like Batman: The Murder Machine, which was a one shot from Dark Knight's Metal, one of the few times that I will give Dark Knight's Metal any sort of accolade. But you see how broken Bruce is at the loss of Alfred, and I think that is ultimately a very strong reflection of Alfred's purpose and his impact on Bruce. Because without Alfred, I don't think the Bat family can truly survive, and it certainly never would have come into existence without Alfred. And I also think that it's a huge disservice that people write Batman as a horrible mentor and a horrible father, because I can't help but think that with Alfred as his role model, that although he may fail, that at the end of the day, his motives and to be a strong father figure to the rest of the Bat family, and his actions would reflect that very much so. I Alfred is just fundamentally, the strongest supporting character in comics for me, not only because of what he does, but because of the great lengths he goes to do those things, and because of the adversity that he faces internally, right, and externally. He is just such a tremendous character. We did have somebody joining us in the chat, to Tahilum 29. He says, "Good to see you, Dark Knight and Comic Boom." Thank you for joining us, man.
Hey, Taylor.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And yeah, go
he
ahead.
also
Sorry.
agrees to the sentiment that Alfred is the glue that keeps the Bat family together. You were saying, Comic
Yeah.
Boom?
I was just going to say that I think I've always viewed that Bruce Wayne in many ways became Bruce Wayne in the Batman Beyond mythology almost became an Alfred-like character.
Mhm.
I always view the older Bruce Wayne in Batman Beyond as mentoring Batman Beyond. Bruce Wayne became Alfred in many ways. That's how I sort of view him, and so that's sort of like paying it forward. So the mentorship and the fatherly love that Alfred gave Batman, I think he paid it forward to Terry McGinnis as Batman Beyond. As I've always seen that connection there.
Yeah, I mean, Alfred is just so vital to the character, to the mythos. Like I said, I would die on the hill any day that he's arguably one of the most important supporting characters of all time in any medium. Comic Boom, we are starting to get close to about 2 hours, so I'm thinking each of us maybe come up with one more pick, and then we wrap up with this excellent conversation. So, Comic Boom, if you had to give one more supporting character that you think is great, that you think everybody on the interwebs needs to hear, who would it be?
Well, that really covers it for me. I don't really have much more to add. I could say as a couple of honorable mentions, Rick Jones for David Banner. He's now played a role. He's now been revealed as, spoiler alert, as the leader in the Immortal Hulk series. Rick Jones has been a sort of a supporting character, but he's been a supporting character to Captain America, Captain Marvel, the Hulk. He's sort of been like a jack of all trades of supporting characters, and in that respect, that's why I put him as a supporting character. The other one is Jim Rhodes as War Machine for Iron Man. Tony Stark's confidant and friend, but I do find maybe Jim Rhodes is a little bit more of a redundancy. But in any event, um, Yeah, I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to go much beyond 2 hours here because I got some other things I got to do. So I'll let you throw one in.
Fair. I'll mention a couple of supporting characters as kind of honorable mentions. I know Tehillim here brings up John Kent. We did talk about John Kent a little bit earlier, my friend. I would invite you to once this is finished to rewind and take a look at the earlier part of the stream. A couple of mentions that I have here that we didn't get to talk about, and then I'll go into kind of the last one that I'm going to go into detail about. But I would say. Obviously, Lois Lane is a huge supporting character for Clark Kent, Superman, not only in a level of adversity and struggle that she causes, but also in her development as a mother and a co-parent to John. Jimmy Olsen is huge because I think that he is kind of the fundamental supporting force, especially behind an early Superman introducing himself to the world. Um, I think
Great
Guy
choice.
Gardner is a really great supporting character, the Green Lantern mythos. And again, because he does represent kind of a very personal adversity. There you go. Um,
That's the punch. I was doing the punch. When the Batman punches Guy Gardner. You know the
yeah.
reference? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. From Justice League International.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Guy Gardner, I think, is really interesting. But the last character that I think I really want to go into detail again, and I guess you can peg me as a Batman obsessionist. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Jim Gordon. Jim
Oh,
Gordon is one of the greatest supporting characters in all the comic books by far, not just because of his longevity, but because of his long, complex relationship with Batman and the Bat family. Um, Jim Gordon, and I think that his relationship specifically as a supporting character with Batman has evolved so much over the years. And you look at the modern retelling of Batman's origin in year one, which I will argue is more of a Jim Gordon story than it is a Bruce Wayne Batman story. Um, he has evolved from this kind of cynical partner to a brothership, almost a kinship with Bruce Wayne Batman. And in the pre New 52 continuity, I am 60% sure that he revealed his identity, or that Batman revealed his identity to Jim Gordon. But I know that at the very least, in many possible futures that are well regarded by the fans, Bruce has revealed his identity to Jim Gordon. I think that he trusts Jim Gordon more than he trusts almost anybody besides maybe, the Bat family and Alfred. Um, Jim Gordon's resolve to do good by Gotham and to even kind of butt heads with Batman when he feels necessary, I think is just a testament to how strong of a character he is.
yeah. No, that's an excellent choice. Jim Gordon is a fantastic choice. I don't recall in the pre New 52 universe Jim Gordon being aware that Bruce Wayne is Batman. However, that could be the case, and I simply forget. What I've always thought, or I've always thought, is that it doesn't matter. Bruce Wayne trusts Jim Gordon, and I've always believed that Jim Gordon knows and figured it out and just doesn't say anything.
Hmm.
I've always thought that Jim Gordon knows Bruce Wayne is Batman because Jim Gordon's not an idiot. He's a brilliant detective. But there's a reason why Jim Gordon doesn't say anything. He doesn't want to. Because Bruce Wayne is a billionaire. He knows that Batman is protecting Gotham as Batman, and he's protecting the financial markets as Bruce Wayne, and he's one of the most powerful financiers in the world. And why would he want to say anything? I've always thoroughly believed that. In fact, there's even a storyline where Jim Gordon, I'm sure there is a storyline where Jim Gordon all but sort of acknowledged that he sort of always knew. But anyways, I'd have to find that. But to me, it's never been important to me because Jim Gordon, let's put it this way, Jim Gordon has always acted to me like he's kind of known that Bruce Wayne is Batman. He's never really pushed the envelope. He's never really gone to that extra investigative length to try to discover who's Batman. That's because it's not important to him. because of that relationship he has with Batman, and it says something. It's interesting what it says about a good relationship, doesn't it? Do I really need to see your face and know who you are to know you as a person?
Well,
I
yeah, and
judge you by your actions.
I
If your
think
act,
I
right?
think that speaks volumes about the intent of Batman and about how Jim Gordon recognizes that as a very positive force for Gotham and by translation the world that they live in. And I think you actually bring up an interesting point, and I agree with you that it's almost more convincing the importance of their relationship that Jim Gordon still fights alongside Batman, not without knowing 100% for certain by not being explicitly told who Batman is under the mask, because I think he sees all he needs to see by what Batman is doing. And I recall, and I think it was from the Batman Adventures comic book series that is supposed to be kind of a continuing point from the Batman animated series, where there's an issue where it's just him and Jim getting coffee. And I think it was like a holiday issue. And I think it really resonates with me um, about kind of the kinship and the brotherhood they share. Although, Batman is constantly looking at him under a mask. And yeah, I mean, it's they have evolved. I think to me, I think you do bring up a good point, and I have heard that before that Jim Gordon has always known who Batman is. I don't think Jim knew it first. I think Jim found out certainly throughout the course of his career, but I'd like to believe that Jim Gordon found kinship with Batman before he ever found out who he was, and that by only opening himself up to the opportunity to form that bond in that relationship, did he truly find out who Batman was under the mask.
Yeah,
And I think that explanation serves particularly well because by translation, obviously his daughter is working with him, so I think that he
yeah,
has to have developed that kinship and that trust in order to kind of let that slide to a degree. But Jim Gordon, I mean, he is, I don't want to call him the reserves of Gotham City, but he serves as kind of the legs of Batman on the streets of Gotham, and they both have such similar uh ends to their goals. And again, their relationship really is just so important aside from their individual motives and how they kind of uh intersect with one another. Jim Gordon is again, he is a character that I would say is easily a top 5 greatest supporting character in all of comic books. And this conversation I think is also very telling of how many great characters kind of surround the Batman mythos aside from, Batman himself.
absolutely. Absolutely, and it's just I take Jim Gordon for granted. It wasn't even on my list, if you can believe it, and it's such an obvious pick. It's just another example of it's such a good character. I take it for granted,
Mm.
literally, and that's why I forgot it because I take those supporting characters for granted. But I guess that's just a testament to how good the characters are, and it's been a very good discussion, Dark Knight. A lot of
Yeah.
insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me too, Jim does kind of represent this level of support that Batman needs moving forward. In a way, I think that he is in a way serves a similar purpose to how Jimmy Olsen does to an early Superman, in the way that Superman needed to see somebody that supported his endeavor as a hero from the ground. He needed a representation of the people he was saving that kind of validated him doing what he does. And I think Jim Gordon very much represents that early on in Batman's career. But I think the thing that sets Jim Gordon apart from Jimmy Olsen, and why I ultimately felt the need to go into Jim Gordon in detail, is because that relationship has evolved so much over the years, and he's become more than just, that validation. He's become a partner in Batman's crusade on crime. So yeah, I'm glad we could go out with a bang talking with Jim Gordon. And I do, while everybody is here watching us live, I do want to invite you guys to join us tomorrow at noon Eastern Standard Time. Myself, my friend Comic Boom, and our pal Joe from Joe's Geek Show are doing a Comics and Coffee live discussion. We're just going to be sipping on Joe or whatever kind of gets us up in the morning and to get us ready for the day, and we're just going to talk comics. It's kind of an ask us anything Q&A. Bring up topics that you want to discuss that maybe we haven't approached yet. It's going to be us talking with you guys live tomorrow at noon. So please do me a favor, go down, click the link to my channel below. It's posted there, and then go click that little reminder button, the little bell button, to be notified when we go live, because a stream like that only works with a decent number of you wonderful people to sit there and talk comics. But with that being said, I want you guys to please do me a favor. If you enjoyed this video, to leave a like so we know that we're doing things that you guys are interested in. And to, of course, subscribe to my channel down below and click the link in the description to go subscribe to this guy over here. Look at me. I pointed in the right direction on the first try. Because, I wouldn't be able to have conversations like this without Comic Boom, and they would not be nearly as stimulating or thought-provoking without him. So if you enjoy this conversation, it is majorly because of this guy over here. So make sure you guys go subscribe to him. Comic Boom, do you have any videos coming out that you want to plug? Anything that you think is going to be important?
Well, obviously, I'm looking forward to tomorrow at noon to talk comic books with you and Comic Joe. That should be fun. And I do want to do a review of God Country, and I want to have a discussion. You and I will probably coordinate a further discussion on God Country. I know you just finished reading that fantastic story. I'd encourage people watching right now to read God Country, and then probably in the next week or so, I'll have that out, and I'll be coordinating something with you, Dark Knight. And honestly, I actually have been reading a lot more. I've been using this extra time I've had at home to read a lot more comics, and actually I'm not doing as many videos as I thought I would. Isn't that ironic? I'm just enjoying. I actually feel like I'm getting back to the basics, and I'm just reading a lot of comic books, and it feels good. And I haven't really done a lot of reviews, but I will. I don't want to get. It's funny. I thought I was going to spend this time maybe complaining and bitching a lot about the current state of the industry, and I haven't been doing that. I've been going back to my roots. I've been reading comic books I enjoy, and I've really been enjoying it. I enjoy these types of discussions, and in a way, I'm using this pandemic, not to get off on a beaten path here, but it's actually, I'm reevaluating a lot of things, spending a lot more time with family here in the house, my daughter, my wife, and we're enjoying things, just spending time together, pretty much, not just because we're forced, but no, it's been good. And I've been enjoying comic books. I may not be doing as many videos, but the ones I do, I'll be enjoying more. And I'm just focusing on what I feel is more important right now. So,
hey man, that's what it's all about. You got to enjoy what you're doing, or else it doesn't provide that same level of satisfaction. And with that being said, this guy puts out some of the most interesting and some of the most unique comic book reviews on the internet in the way he approaches it. So make sure you guys go check him out, of course. And again, please make sure to subscribe to both channels. Click the little bell button. It is super important so that you guys know when our videos go up, conversations like these. But I do want to thank everybody that participated in the chat today. You guys had some really, really great recommendations and kind of.
I do want to give a shout out. I have to interrupt. I have to give a shout out to Helium-29 and Tevya. I am a member of the Fortress of Attitude. I did mention this before at the beginning, but I know they're watching. So guys, go to Tevya Smolka, subscribe to him, Helium-29. We do talk all things Super Sons. And they're usually fun streams, and all things John Kent and Damian Wayne. So check out Helium-29 and Tevya Smolka.
Cool. And further kind of giving some shout outs to those in the chat that participated. We got a couple great recommendations from Taylor Pector. We got a great recommendation from Gore Vidal. We had JT Gamer in the chat. Obviously, Tehillim coming in there a little bit later with some great recommendations. So thank you guys for participating. I hope to see you all again tomorrow at noon, my channel, for a session of Comics and Coffee, a Q&A, Ask Us Anything, a comic book community chat. So thank you guys so much for watching. Keep an eye on everything. And this has been Dark Knight Nation and Comic Boom, signing out for another great episode of Let's Talk Comics.